Staff Sergeant Kim Deo stood in the cold cargo bay of New Geneva Spaceport, his breath forming small clouds in the recycled air. The massive space station hummed with activity, cargo ships docking, passenger shuttles arriving from distant worlds, and the constant chatter of 1,000 different species conducting business. But for Deo, the universe had narrowed to just him and the flag-draped casket beside him. The crimson and gold flag of the Terran Federation lay perfectly draped over the metal container. Inside was Major Park Jin-woo, and Deo could still hear the man's last transmission echoing in his mind. Park had been more than a commanding officer. He was a legend, a warrior who had earned the nickname Iron Wolf during the Centauri campaigns. At 47, he should have been enjoying retirement with his wife and 2 daughters back on Earth. Instead, he lay cold and still. Another casualty of humanity's endless struggle for survival among the stars. Deo adjusted his black ceremonial uniform, the fabric still crisp despite the long journey from the outer rim. The silver insignia on his collar caught the harsh fluorescent lights, the crossed swords and star that marked him as one of the elite Tomb Guard. For 300 years since humanity first reached the stars, the Tomb Guard had performed this sacred duty. No fallen soldier traveled alone. No hero returned home without honor. The cargo bay doors hissed open, revealing the bustling main terminal beyond. Travelers from across the galaxy moved through the space, tall, blue-skinned Andorians discussing trade agreements, insectoid Zephyrians clicking their mandibles in rapid conversation, and dozens of other species that made the galaxy their home. But it was the humans that caught Deo's attention. They moved with less confidence than he remembered, their heads down, their voices quiet. Something had changed in the months since he'd last been to the core worlds. Deo activated the casket's repulsor field, and it rose smoothly from the deck. The soft hum of the anti-gravity unit was barely audible over the terminal's noise. He took his position at the head of the casket and began the slow, measured march that had been performed countless times before. Each step was deliberate, each movement precise. This was not just a walk, it was a ceremony, a final salute to a fallen brother. His polished boots clicked against the metal deck platings. He entered the main terminal. The sound seemed to cut through the ambient noise, and heads began to turn. A few humans stopped what they were doing, some placing their hands over their hearts. An elderly woman, probably a veteran herself, straightened her shoulders and came to attention. This was what the ceremony was meant to do, to remind everyone what sacrifice looked like. But before Deo could take another step, 3 figures blocked his path. Airport Security Chief Williams, a heavy-set man with tired eyes and a permanent scowl, stepped forward flanked by 2 guards. Williams had the look of someone who had given up on ideals long ago. Someone who followed orders without question. "Stop. Right there, soldier," Williams commanded, his voice cutting through the terminal's buzz. The nearby conversations died as people turned to watch. New regulations prohibit military displays in civilian areas. You'll have to use the freight elevator. Deo felt his jaw tighten, but his expression remained neutral. The Tomb Guard were trained to maintain dignity under all circumstances. "Sir, this is a fallen hero returning home. The Tomb Guard has escorted our dead for 3 centuries. I will not dishonor Major Park by treating him like cargo." William stepped closer, his chest puffed out with borrowed authority. "I don't care about your traditions. The Galactic Council has made it clear that human military ceremonies make our alien visitors uncomfortable. You're disrupting commerce." He gestured toward the busy terminal. "This is a place of business, not a parade ground." The words hit Deo like a physical blow. 3 centuries of tradition, dismissed with a bureaucrat's wave. He thought of all the heroes who had made this journey before, the defenders of Lunar City, the martyrs of the Vegan War, The countless soldiers who had died so that humanity could claim its place among the stars. Were their sacrifices worth so little? In the corner of the terminal, near the diplomatic lounge, Ambassador Velkari of the Zexanin Empire watched the confrontation with obvious satisfaction, her four eyes, ranged in a diamond pattern on her elongated skull, gleamed with an intelligence that was both alien and calculating. The Zexanin were one of the newer members of the Galactic Council, but they had quickly gained influence through their economic power and political maneuvering. Velkari's presence here was no coincidence. The crowd of travelers began to gather, sensing that something significant was happening. Humans, aliens, and mixed species groups all stopped their activities to watch. The terminal's background noise faded as more people took notice. Deho planted his feet firmly on the deck, his hand resting on the casket's edge. "I am not moving, sir, not without my brother." The standoff had begun. The tension in the terminal grew thicker with each passing minute. Staff Sergeant Kim Deho stood like a statue beside Major Park's casket, his black uniform a stark contrast against the bright commercial lighting. Security Chief Williams paced back and forth, his face red with frustration. He kept glancing at his wrist communicator, clearly receiving pressure from higher up the chain of command. "This is your last warning, soldier," Williams barked, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. More security guards had arrived, but they seemed hesitant to actually lay hands on a member of the Tomb Guard, even the alien. Security personnel, usually quick to enforce spaceport regulations, hung back uncertainly. Terminal Manager Harrison, a thin man with nervous eyes, pushed through the crowd of guards. "Arrest him," he shouted. "He's causing a public disturbance. The shipping schedules are already backing up because of this circus." But Deho didn't move. He stood at attention, his eyes fixed straight ahead, one hand resting protectively on the casket. The crowd round them had grown larger, and the whispers were getting louder. People were pulling out their personal recording devices, their tablets and neural interfaces capturing every moment. A young human woman near the front of the crowd was live streaming to her followers. "This is unbelievable," she whispered into her device. "They're trying to arrest a tomb guard for doing his job. This is going viral across the entire sector." The footage was indeed spreading like wildfire across the galactic internet. Within minutes, the confrontation was being shared on social networks from Earth to the outer colonies. Comments flooded in from across human space, most of them expressing outrage at the treatment of their fallen hero. That's when Dr. Lee So-young pushed through the crowd. She was a small woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, and the kind of quiet authority that came from years of dealing with colonial politics. She had been returning from a research mission to the Outer Rim when the confrontation began, and she recognized something in the scene that others had missed. "Wait," she called out, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "I know who this soldier is." The crowd fell silent, and even Williams paused his pacing. Dr. Lee stepped forward, her eyes focused on the flag-draped casket. "Major Park. Jinwoo was the ghost of Kepler 442. He saved my sister's family during the evacuation." A ripple of recognition went through the crowd. The ghost of Kepler 442 was legend throughout the colonies. Stories of his heroism had spread through the Outer Rim settlements like wildfire. Dr. Lee's voice grew stronger as she continued. "The Vexstar invasion force hit Kepler 442 without warning. 3 battle cruisers dropped out of hyperspace and started bombing the civilian settlements. The colonial defense force was outnumbered 10-1. The crowd leaned in, hanging on her every word. Even some of the alien observers seemed interested in the story. "The evacuation was chaos," Dr. Lee continued. 50,000 people trying to reach the transport ships while Vexstar ground forces advanced on. The spaceport, The main gate was the only way out, but it was also the most vulnerable point. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. Park could have evacuated with the first wave of transports. Instead, he stayed behind with a handful of volunteers to hold the line. William stepped forward, his face twisted with annoyance. That's irrelevant. The new Protocol 7 Alpha prohibits military displays in civilian areas. I don't care what he did. In some backwater colony, Protocol 7 Alpha, Dr. Lee interrupted, her eyes widening with sudden understanding. That wasn't passed by our government. That came directly from the Galactic Council 2 weeks ago. The crowd stirred uneasily. The Galactic Council's authority over human internal affairs had always been a sensitive subject. Dr. Lee turned to face the crowd, her voice rising. Don't you see what's happening here? They're making us abandon our own traditions, our own honor, to appease beings who view us as inferior. She gestured toward the alien observers watching from the sidelines. They want us to forget who we are, to become ashamed of our own courage. The crowd's murmur grew louder, and the mood began to shift. People were connecting the dots, realizing that this wasn't just about spaceport regulations. The Vexstar were slaughtering civilians, Dr. Lee continued, her voice now carrying across the entire terminal. They were targeting the evacuation centers, trying to maximize casualties. Puck held the main gate alone for 6 hours. 6 hours. His armor was torn apart. His weapons were failing. But he kept fighting. He died so others could live. A veteran in the crowd called out. How many did he save? All of them, Dr. Lee replied. 50,000 people. Men, women, children, elderly. Every single person who wanted to evacuate made it to safety because one man decided their lives were worth more than his own. The crowd was getting agitated now, and not at Day-Ho. Their anger was turning toward the security forces, toward the regulations that would treat such a hero like cargo. That's when Ambassador Velkari stepped forward, her alien features twisted with disdain. Her 4 eyes focused on the crowd with cold calculation. Humans must learn their place in the galactic community, she said, her voice carrying a strange hissing quality. Your warrior cultures, primitive, violence and military displays have no place in a civilized society. The effect was immediate. The crowd's anger, which had been building slowly, suddenly erupted into open hostility. Shots rang out from human voices throughout the terminal. Primitive. We're primitive. Who asked you? Alien. This is our space. Station. Dr. Lee pointed at the ambassador. There it is, the truth. They think we're primitive because we honor our heroes, because we remember sacrifice. They want us to be ashamed of our courage. The crowd began to understand that this wasn't about regulations or comfort levels. This was about control. This was about breaking the human spirit, about making them forget what made them strong. The standoff was no longer just between Day-Ho and the security forces. It had become something much larger. Something that would spread far beyond the walls of New Geneva Spaceport. The first ships began arriving within an hour of the viral footage spreading across the galactic network. They came from everywhere. Battered civilian transports from the mining colonies, sleek military shuttles from nearby defense stations, and converted cargo haulers filled with families who had dropped everything to make the journey to New Geneva. Staff Sergeant Kim Day-Ho remained at his post, unmoved by the growing chaos around him. His legs ached from standing at attention for hours, but he refused to show any sign of weakness. The casket beside him had become more than just Major Park's final resting place. It had become a symbol of everything humanity stood for. The spaceport's traffic control was in complete meltdown. Ships were requesting emergency landing clearances faster than the controllers could process them. Emergency Director Kim Yanseo watched the incoming traffic display with growing alarm. "We've got over 300 ships in the queue," she reported to her supervisor, "and more coming every minute." On the main terminal level, the crowd had grown beyond anything the security forces could handle. Former Marines stood shoulder to shoulder with colonial farmers. Starfleet officers in dress uniforms mingled with asteroid miners still wearing their work clothes. What united them all was the shared understanding that something fundamental was being attacked. Lieutenant Colonel Park Hyanwu, a veteran of the Vegan War, pushed through the crowd carrying a worn photograph. "This is my son," he announced to anyone who would listen. "He died defending the supply lines to Proxima Base. The Tomb Guard brought him home with honor. Now they want to treat our heroes like freight." The crowd roared its approval. More people were arriving every minute, and the terminal was reaching dangerous capacity levels. But nobody was leaving. If anything, the crowd was becoming more determined. That's when the thunderous sound of military engines echoed through the station. A black tactical shuttle, bearing the insignia of the Tomb Guard, requested immediate docking clearance. The traffic controllers didn't dare refuse. Captain Song Min-ho emerged from the shuttle with 12 other Tomb Guards. Their black uniforms were pristine, their weapons ceremonial but functional. They moved with the precise, measured steps of soldiers who had trained together for years. The crowd parted before them like water, creating a path directly to where Dae-ho stood. "Staff Sergeant Kim," Captain Song said formally, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of tradition. "We stand with you." The 12 guards took positions round the casket, their rifles held at present arms. The crowd fell silent, understanding that they were witnessing something historic. The Tomb Guard had never assembled in such numbers for a single fallen soldier. This was unprecedented. The formation created an honor corridor that stretched from the casket to the main exit. The guards stood motionless, their faces like stone, their eyes focused straight ahead. Even the alien observer seemed impressed by the display of military discipline. But this was just the beginning. Throughout the terminal, veterans were finding each other and organizing. They formed loose ranks based on their old units: the 3rd Colonial Marines, the Lunar Defense Force, the Deep Space Fleet. Within minutes, thousands of people had transformed from a disorganized crowd into something that looked suspiciously like a military formation. The crowd continued to swell. Families arrived carrying pictures of their own fallen heroes, sons and daughters, fathers and mothers who had died defending human colonies across the galaxy. An elderly woman held a faded photograph of her husband, killed in the First Contact War 50 years ago. A young man carried a tablet displaying his sister's service record from the Outer Rim campaigns. Veterans wore their medals with pride, many of them for the first time in years. Decorations that had been gathering dust in closets were now displayed openly: purple hearts, silver stars, colonial defense medals. The terminal sparkled with the reflected light of human courage. The atmosphere changed when Governor Cho Jae-sung arrived by emergency transport. His official shuttle landed in the VIP section, and he strode into the terminal surrounded by his security detail. The crowd recognized him immediately. He was a former Starfleet admiral who had transitioned to politics, and he still carried himself like a military officer. "Chief Williams," he announced, his voice carrying over the crowd, "you are relieved of duty. This procession will continue with full honors." Williams looked stunned. "Sir, the Galactic Council regulations clearly state." "The Galactic Council," the governor interrupted, "has no authority over human military traditions. This is a human station in human space. Honoring a human hero, the procession will proceed." The crowd erupted in cheers, but the celebration was short-lived. Reports were coming in from across human space that showed the situation was far bigger than anyone had imagined. The Tar City colonies had declared their support, with Governor Martinez announcing that all colonial defense forces would honor fallen soldiers according to human tradition. Regardless of alien objections, the Mars garrison issued a statement of solidarity. And even the isolated mining stations in the asteroid belt were sending messages of defiance. On the other side of the galaxy, Ambassador Velkari retreated to her shuttle, frantically communicating with her superiors through encrypted channels. The plan that had seemed so simple was falling apart. Humanity was supposed to be divided, weakened by political correctness and cultural shame. Instead, they were uniting round their military traditions. The protocols are failing, she reported to the Galactic Council. The humans are not responding as predicted. They're becoming more defiant, not less. The response from her superiors was swift and harsh. The operation was entering a new phase. If cultural manipulation couldn't break human resistance, then more direct methods would be necessary. But it was too late to contain what had begun. Humanity was waking up to the reality of their situation, and they didn't like what they saw. The massive crowd held its breath as the honor guard began to move. Staff Sergeant Kim Deho took his position at the head of the procession, his black uniform cutting a sharp silhouette against the terminal's bright lights. The 13 tomb guards moved in perfect synchronization, their boots striking the deck in a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of humanity itself. But before they could take more than a few steps, Dr. Lee So-young stepped into the center of the corridor. She held a small device in her hand, a quantum decryption unit that was definitely not standard civilian equipment. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with the intensity of someone who had just uncovered a terrible truth. Wait. She called out, her voice carrying across the now silent terminal. Before we honor Major Park, you need to know what he really died for, what he discovered. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. Dr. Lee activated her device, and holographic displays materialized in the air above the crowd. The images showed encrypted communications, data streams, and classified documents that should have been impossible for a civilian to access. I've been tracking communication patterns between the Galactic Council and various human government officials, she announced, her voice growing stronger. What I found will shock you. Protocol 7 Alpha isn't just a regulation. It's part of a larger strategy called Operation Subjugation. The holographic display shifted, showing a network of communications that stretched across the galaxy. The data was complex, but the pattern was clear even to non-technical observers. The Galactic Council had been systematically infiltrating human society. They've been undermining our military traditions, our unity, our strength. Dr. Lee continued, her voice now carrying to every corner of the terminal. Every sensitivity protocol introduced in the past year, every regulation that weakened our defense forces, every cultural change that made us question our own values, it all came from them. The crowd began to murmur as the implications sank in. These weren't random bureaucratic changes. This was a coordinated attack on human society itself. But the worst revelation was yet to come. Dr. Lee manipulated the holographic display, bringing up a classified communication from the Vexstar High Command. The alien text was translated in real time, and the words sent a chill through the crowd. The Vexstar invasion of Kepler 442 wasn't random, Dr. Lee announced. It was a test. They wanted to see how we'd respond when weakened by their cultural interference. They expected our defenses to crumble, our soldiers to be demoralized, our people to surrender without significant resistance. The terminal erupted. In angry shouts, people were beginning to understand that every human who had died in that invasion had been a victim of manipulation, not just alien aggression. But something went wrong with their plan. Dr. Lee continued, her voice cutting through the noise. They didn't count on heroes like Major Park. They didn't expect humans to fight back with such determination. She brought up another display, this one showing battle footage from Kepler 442. The images were grainy, captured by surveillance drones, but they showed Major Park's incredible last stand. For 6 hours, he had held a position that should have fallen in minutes. His armor was torn apart. His weapons were failing. But he kept fighting. The Galactic Council has been convinced by their own advisors that humans are inherently weak. Dr. Lee explained, "They believe we'll abandon our principles at the first sign of social pressure. They think we'll trade our freedom for the illusion of peace." The evidence was overwhelming. The Council had been manipulating human society for months, introducing regulations and cultural changes designed to weaken human resolve. They had convinced human leaders that accommodation was necessary for galactic peace, while secretly preparing for conquest. Captain Song Min-ho stepped forward, his face grim. "Dr. Lee, do you have Major Park's final transmission, the one that was classified by Earth Command?" Dr. Lee nodded and activated another display. The hologram showed Major Park in his final moments, his armor cracked and smoking, his face bloodied but determined. His voice was rough with pain. But his words were clear. "If anyone receives this message," Park's recorded voice said, "know that the enemy isn't just at our gates. They're in our halls of power. The Galactic Council has been playing us like puppets, making us weak, making us doubt ourselves. They want us to forget what makes us human." The crowd was completely silent. Now, hanging on every word of their fallen hero, "Trust no one who asks you to abandon what makes you human." Park continued, "Honor is not negotiable. Duty is not optional. We are the children of Earth, and we bow to no one. The galaxy thinks we're weak because we've been trained to think we're weak, but they're wrong. We're the species that conquered our own world, that reached for the stars when everyone said it was impossible." Park's image flickered as his communication equipment failed, but his final words came through clearly. "Remember who you are, remember what you're fighting for, and never, never give up." The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed across the spaceport like thunder. The sound was so loud it could be heard in the docking bays, in the service corridors, even in the alien diplomatic quarters where Ambassador Velkari and her colleagues were monitoring the situation. If growing alarm. This was no longer just a funeral procession. This was a declaration of independence. This was humanity remembering its strength. The procession began to move again, but now it carried a different energy. The tomb guards marched with the weight of revealed truth, and the crowd followed with the determination of a people who had just realized they were at war. The procession moved through the terminal like a river of determination, but it was unlike any funeral march in human history. The 13 tomb guards led the way, their black uniforms creating a stark contrast against the bright commercial lighting behind them. Staff Sergeant Kim Dae-ho guided Major Park's casket with steady hands, his eyes focused straight ahead. But it was the crowd that followed that truly captured the moment's power. Millions of people had gathered, not just in the spaceport, but throughout the station's levels. They lined the corridors, filled the observation decks, and crowded into every available space. Veterans stood at attention, their medals gleaming. Families held pictures of their own fallen heroes. Children watched with wide eyes as history unfolded before them. The Hall of Heroes occupied the central section of New Geneva Station, a massive chamber with walls lined with holographic displays showing the faces of human warriors who had died defending their species. The chamber could hold thousands, but today it seemed small compared to the crowd that had gathered. As the procession approached the hall's entrance, emergency broadcasts began playing throughout human space. President Yoon Suk-yeol appeared on screens across the galaxy, his face grave but determined. He stood in the presidential palace on Earth, but his words reached every human settlement from the inner colonies to the frontier worlds. "My fellow humans," he began, his voice carrying the weight of history. "Today we learned a truth that changes everything. The Galactic Council has betrayed our trust. They sought to make us weak, to break our spirit, to prepare us for conquest. But they underestimated the human heart." The crowd in the Hall of Heroes fell silent, listening to their leader's words. Outside, throughout the station, people stopped what they were doing to watch the historic address for months. "We have been told to abandon our traditions, to be ashamed of our strength, to apologize for our courage. We were told this was necessary for galactic peace. But we now know the truth. They were preparing us for slavery." The president's voice grew stronger, more determined. "Today, we withdraw from their false union. Today, we stand as free people. The Terran Federation will no longer bow to alien manipulation. We will defend our worlds, our people, and our way of life." The crowd erupted in cheers that seemed to shake the station itself. But the celebration was short-lived as reports began flooding in from across human space. The galaxy was reacting to humanity's declaration of independence, and not all of the reactions were friendly. Ambassador Velkari watched from her departing shuttle as humanity transformed before her eyes. The weak, compliant species they had been molding was gone. In its place stood something far more dangerous, a united humanity that remembered its strength. Her four eyes tracked the crowds below, calculating the implications of what she was seeing. This was not anticipated. She reported to her superiors through encrypted channels. The psychological profiles suggested they would submit when faced with authority. Instead, they are unifying around their military traditions. The response from the Galactic Council was swift and harsh. If cultural manipulation could break human resistance, then more direct methods would be necessary. Fleet Command issued new orders to the various alien navies. The invasion timeline was being accelerated, but the humans were not idle. As Major Park's casket was placed in the Hall of Heroes, surrounded by the holographic faces of thousands of other fallen warriors, Staff Sergeant Kim Deo stood at attention for the final time. His duty was complete, but a new duty was beginning for all of humanity around him. The greatest gathering of human military might in history began to assemble. The colonies were mobilizing their defense forces. The deep space fleet was moving to battle stations. Mining stations were being converted into weapons platforms. Even civilian ships were being retrofitted with whatever weapons could be found. Admiral Lee Dongwook, commander of the Terran Space Fleet, addressed the gathered officers. "We always knew this day might come," he said, his voice carrying across the command center. "The day when humanity would have to stand alone against the galaxy. But we're not the same species that barely survived first contact 50 years ago. We're stronger, smarter, and more determined." The mobilization was unlike anything in human history. Every world, every station, every settlement began preparing for war. The outer colonies, who had always been the most independent, were the first to respond. The mining fleets in the asteroid belt began moving towards strategic positions. The agricultural world started stockpiling supplies for a long conflict. But it was the veterans who truly made the difference. Men and women who had served in the colonial wars, who had fought the Vextar, who had defended human space against a dozen different threats, came out of retirement. They dusted off their uniforms, cleaned their weapons, and prepared for one final battle. The Vextar had made a fatal error. They had awakened humanity not to fear, but to purpose. They had assumed that humans, like most species, would choose survival over principle. But they had forgotten that humans were the species that had fought each other for thousands of years, that had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed them. In the depths of space, alien fleets prepared for what they thought would be an easy conquest. Vex-Star battle cruisers moved toward human space, their commanders confident that the psychological warfare had done its work. Saxon and economic fleets prepared to take control of human trade routes. Other alien species positioned themselves to claim pieces of human territory, but they were about to learn why humans had earned their reputation as the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they never abandoned their own. Because they would fight impossible odds for causes they believed in. Because they would die before they would kneel. The war for humanity's freedom was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The end.